Good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining our webinar today. This is Michelle Savage. I'm with Xbrl US, and we're here for the program Improving the Surety Underwriting Process through Data Standards, Technical Review for Sureties. I want to thank the National Association of Surety Bond Producers, the NASBP, for helping us co-host this program today. And we have an interesting program for you today, which I'll walk you through in just a minute. I just want to cover a couple of issues or logistical issues. We are able to take questions, and you can post questions into the Q&A link at the top of your screen, and just submit questions through the program, and we'll take them probably at the end of the program as we have a full schedule. But please do remember to post your questions there. If you have any technical issues, please email us at support, S-U-P-P-O-R-T, at xbrl.us, or you can also post your questions in the Q&A link, and we'll do our best to get you back up and online if you're having problems. So with that, I'm going to turn to our agenda, excuse me, and walk you through our plan for the next 60 minutes. We're going to start off with the business case for standards in the surety underwriting process, and that's going to be covered by Greg Davenport. Greg is Senior VP for Global Operations at Liberty Mutual. Next, I'm going to give a brief review of the Xbrl data standard and tell you a little bit more about that. Then we're going to turn to Campbell Pride. Campbell is President and CEO of Xbrl US. Well, he will give an online review of the work in process taxonomy and talk about other materials that we're making available to developers. Then we'll be turning it over to Alexander Falk. Alexander is CEO of Altova, and he's going to provide a technical demonstration on consuming an Xbrl formatted work in process report. And then finally, Robert Kuhn, who's Vice President Surety at Scott Insurance, is going to be speaking, and he's speaking on behalf of the NASBP. He's going to give us our next steps on the pilot and give some ideas on how you can get involved. And then we'll go on to talk a little bit about some Q&A questions. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Greg Davenport, who's going to walk us through the business case. Greg?
Thank you, Michelle, and hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. One of the key missions for NASBP and the SFA, or Surety and Fidelity Association of America's technology committees, has been to create and promote data standards for the free exchange of information between key stakeholders in the surety and contracting process. In fact, it just occurred to me that 20 years ago this week, we had about 80 key representatives from all major sureties and the top producers and key trade organizations, including NASBP and SFA, that sponsored it, meet in Seattle to determine that, yes, we want to develop data standards. And a lot's happened in those 20 years, working primarily with Accord on forms. So report of execution, we're working to update and create, we've just created some standards for bid and bond request, contractor questionnaire, and the like. But what about financial information? We're presently rekeying financial information as sureties. If you think about the other trading partners involved in that, CPAs, agents and brokers, contractors themselves, and other third-party solution providers, we would love to eliminate the frictional cost, if you will, as we trade that financial information to make our underwriting decisions. So we turn to Xbrl, and I'll explain who Xbrl is in a minute, but essentially they already have the financial data standards for financial statements. The only missing piece was the work in process schedule and a couple of terms that are unique to the construction industry: cost and earnings and excess of billings and the like. And so we turned to Xbrl this year, and they have been very helpful in working with us to finish out that financial standard. So now we'll have the complete set of financial standards that we'll need for underwriting information and financial information to aid in our surety process. So that's what we want to talk about today. So many of you may be familiar. Here's a typical work in process schedule. What happens today is we get those in paper or in PDF through email generally, and what happens? We're rekeying them, which is time. It's very manual. It's time consuming, labor intensive, error prone, and costly. So again, that's why we're talking about trying to create data standards. And if you could switch over to a couple more slides, Michelle, please. There you go, to the next one. So that's where Xbrl comes into play. Xbrl stands for Extensible Business Reporting Language. It's really a version of XML. And it's a financial data standard used in the United States today for reporting by public companies to the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and by bank institutions reporting to the FDIC to reduce cost and improve accuracy and timeliness. An Xbrl implementation is also underway for government agency reporting to the U.S. Treasury Department. Xbrl standard is also used extensively outside the U.S. in many countries to report financial data for not only public companies, but also private companies reporting to regulators and to tax authorities and for government reporting. So Xbrl makes that data that at least most of us today working with construction contractors and the like get in that paper form, and actually puts it in a format that's extractable. And it's clearly defined to creators, data intermediaries, and end users. And this makes it available to our surety and to banks, to other trading partners at a lower cost with reduced opportunity for fraud and increased accuracy, and it's more timely. That's really key here. People have asked us, what's in it for the contractor? Well, it all translates into responsiveness. If we can get that data faster, get it into our systems, get it analyzed, we can respond to the request for surety credit faster, and we have a better picture of what, again, for a contractor, what their backlog is. And so that's one of the benefits there. So here's how we propose, if you can go to the next slide, please, Michelle. Here's how we propose the standards be used in the underwriting process going forward. I want to clarify, we are not standardizing the underwriting process. That is up to each surety, and it's between they and their agent and broker and customer. It's not standardizing underwriting. It's just standardizing how we define the data and providing a common way to exchange it. So it's much like the work that was done over 100 years ago to standardize the electrical current so that and the plugs on a electrical outlet so that everybody can use the same one. We weren't so successful getting the same standard for the U.S. and Europe, but that's another story. So that's really what we're talking about here. So what will happen now that we've developed the standard and once implemented is the contractor will create their financials as they do today, including a work in process report, through their financial system, or if they don't have one, through an Excel file. At the same time, create this Xbrl formatted version. Then they would send both to their agent or broker, or the CPA would send it on their behalf. So whoever is creating it at the source, that's how it gets in the Xbrl format. And then those are received eventually by the surety, or again, if the broker or agent has a system that can receive the Xbrl, and we're promoting that idea. With a push of a button, it dumps in to the system. It can run all the numbers, spread the numbers, and you have your analysis right there. That's really what we're talking about. No need to rekey the information. It will not require changing the surety's financial systems or the banks or the brokers. It only requires doing one-time mapping of their existing system into the Xbrl terms created to identify the financial data reported. Again, once we get it, we can process it in our own manner. Many of us feel we have kind of a proprietary secret sauce on how to analyze a work in process schedule, do an analysis of profitability, what have you. And there's no change about that. Nobody has to make that public to participate in this. It's just getting that data in a way that we can extract it and use it. So again, the benefits are clear. The data can be transferred automatically, reducing the time and cost of manual labor spent rekeying the financial information by all parties. So if you can go to the next slide, please, Michelle. I want to kind of wrap up by explaining why we're talking to you today. And again, thank you for taking the time to join us and understand this. We've created a pilot program specifically focused on the work in process schedule. As I mentioned, that's just a piece of the overall financials, but the work for the overall financials is already done. It's proven, it's in practice. So it's really just the work in process schedule to really complete it. And we've had sponsoring organizations that are listed here, including Galena, Liberty Mutual, Travelers, Zurich, AIG, and the NASBP, and other organizations that are participating that are listed here. And the reason we've done that is to really help working with Michelle and Campbell and others to give them the business input to really frame and get this started and going. And so now they're the experts. They've done this work to help map it. They've created the idea now, and the phase we're in is to test out the premise of Xbrl by creating a digital dictionary of terms called a taxonomy. That's on the next slide. Here, Michelle, if you don't mind flipping. And those terms in the dictionary include concepts, as I mentioned, such as estimated contract revenue, percent complete, under and over billings, basically what you need for a WIP report. So far, the draft taxonomy has been created. It's been posted along with other materials for a 60-day public review and comment period. The purpose of the public review, which we're asking you to participate in today, is to gather more information from all possible stakeholders. So, you know, those of us who were listed on that previous slide, we did kind of the legwork, but we want a broad review. There are over 100 people that have registered for this call. Previous call we had with business representatives a couple weeks ago had about 80. So that's just fantastic. And, you know, we encourage, feel free to pass this on, involve other people in your organization if you wish. So, again, thank you. I'll turn it over to Michelle now to explain a little bit more about what's involved with this public review and where you can provide and how you can provide your input and feedback.
Greg, thanks very much. Yeah, I'm going to walk you through a little bit about Xbrl, just to help you understand that a bit more. Xbrl, which, as Greg said, stands for Extensible Business Reporting Language, is an XML-based markup language. XML makes data that was previously paper-based or locked in reports into information that can be read and used through a computer without the need to rekey and interpret that data. XML, which stands for Extensible Markup Language, was originally developed by the World Wide Web Consortium. And it's very much a global standard. It's used to tag, which can be referred to as kind of embedding information into a piece of data. So here at the bottom of the screen here, you see an example of a data point that has been tagged. Now, if we saw the figure 7 by itself, we'd have no idea what that stood for. But if it was tagged, and what you see in the angle brackets is the XML tag by number of buildings, then that information would be embedded in that number 7 and would kind of be transported along with it, so that the end user, when they obtain that information, they know exactly what it means. They know that number 7 is the number of buildings. So that's really what that's all for. So Xbrl, Extensible Business Reporting Language, was developed by a group of accounting professionals who wanted to add structure to financial data. They wanted to make it easier to consume and use, and they also wanted to reduce the cost of rekeying the information, which happens over and over and over. So they took the XML standard and they added structure into it to put restrictions into how common features of financial data can be presented. And so the kinds of information that they standardized were things like reporting periods, moments in time and periods in time, decimals, the entity name, the organization that's actually reporting the information, the units of measure, the concept that's reported. So they put this structure into place for financial information so that there'd be more consistency in how the Xbrl data is produced, so that the work in process report from company A can be compared and consumed exactly the same as the work in process report from company B. So there's more consistency in the creation of the data. So let's go back and take a look at the work in process report that Greg was showing earlier. And we'll look at how an individual fact value is reported here and how it's defined. So we know by reading the columns and the rows of this table that the value 12,113,470 is defined as earned contract revenue. We know it's for contract number 200 for the period from inception to December 31st, 2014. But a computer can't read that data. If this was in an Excel spreadsheet and that data was sent to a computer, it would not know what it was looking at. So today, as Greg was explaining, individuals at sureties have to rekey this information into their financial systems manually in order for their systems to actually recognize what that data point means. So this is where a data standard like Xbrl comes into play. The image that you see here kind of diagrams out how this value would be defined in an Xbrl document. To create an Xbrl document requires the combination of a taxonomy, which we see represented on the left here, which is a digital collection of terms that defines all of the reporting needs. So it defines things like earned contract revenue, contract percent complete, estimated revenues and costs, and it defines those for individual jobs or contracts. It includes the name of the concept and the definition of that concept. The instance document is the actual Xbrl document that defines the reporting situation. So it includes the time period, the reporting entity, decimals, units of measure, and dimensions, which are actually help define financial tables. So when an Xbrl document is created, it takes a combination of the taxonomy and the instance document to provide all the information that's needed by the end user. So now you understand how the taxonomy and the instance document work together. So let's go back to the data point that we looked at earlier. The value here that you see in the center, the 12 million, is defined by the taxonomy concept, which in this case is earned contract revenue. And the instance document, which you see represented in the blue to the right, is used to define the important features of that concept. And reading this diagram clockwise, you see that the entity is ABC Contractor, and the value is further defined by the individual project or contract, which you see is defined here as project number 200. The value is in US dollars, the decimals are in millions, and it's for the time period from inception to December 31st, 2014. So as Greg explained, as part of this pilot, we have actually developed a draft taxonomy which represents this collection of terms. And that's what we're now going to show you. And we're going to get online and show how this works. And I'm going to stop sharing and turn this over to Campbell Pride. So Campbell.
Thanks, Michelle. So I'm just bringing up my screen. And what we're looking at here is the work in progress taxonomy. And I'm just going to walk you through how this works and how you can make comments on it. But to get to this, to see the taxonomy, you have to go to our website. We're make available where it is, so you can find it if you want to have a look at it and if you want to put any comments in. So you can come to the Xbrl US website, which is just xbrl.us, and we have it under a section called Government and Industry. And if you click here, we have a section called Surety. And if you bring this up, it basically gives you some overviews of the surety taxonomy and gives you some information that you may be interested in reading. And one of the things on the drop down is the Surety Work in Progress Taxonomy Public Review, which you can click on. And that's going to give you all the details about how you can look at the taxonomy. Let me make my screen a little bit bigger so you can see it. And what we've done is we put an application up which just allows you to go and look at the work in progress text and work in process taxonomy. So I've just brought that up already, and we can have a look at it. So just to quickly walk you through the structure of the taxonomy, what we're looking at here is a taxonomy, is an Xbrl taxonomy tool. This is just taking the Xbrl syntax that Michelle showed you earlier, and then is just putting it into a graphical interface so you can see it. And what we have is, it's pretty straightforward. It's just really defining what are the components that you'd see in the work in process report. It doesn't look like a table per se, but it gives you all the information that would typically be disclosed. And there's a few things you may want to look at here, just to explain some of the terms so you know what you're looking at. You can see here we've got this work in process table. It looks like a blue cube. That basically indicates that we've got a table, and then within this table you can see we've got line items, and we've got some information that you'd typically see in a report. Now, there may be more information here than you have in a report that you're used to seeing, and the reason for that is that what the taxonomy tries to do is to capture all the different types of information that any construction company may include in a work in process report. So it's almost like a complete listing of everything that could be there. And that's why you'll see a lot of stuff. So it doesn't mean you have to go and tag every one of these fields. You just need to identify those things are the same that what you have. And the reason we do this, one of the things we don't want to have is have information missing. If someone has information that they want to report, we want to make sure that there's a tag available for it. So one of the key parts of the public review is, if you have a look at this and there's information that you include in your work in process report and it's not here in the taxonomy, please let us know. And there's a way you can make comments. You can see all the comments that folks have made here, but there's little plus signs. You can see if you click on those, you can add a comment. And you may want to add a comment onto the table and say, oh, look, you're missing the gross profit earned to date on a contract. So if you look at the taxonomy, we've broken this up into some structure. You can see here's details about the contracts, just overlying detail, and then there's a lot of the financial information, and we've broken up into some categories here called contract revenue, contract costs, contract gross profit, and then basically we have the information on what's earned to date, what's yet to be earned, and what the estimated is, and it's repeated for each of these. Now, Alex will walk you through what this looks like when you put data against it in a minute, but I just wanted to let you know this is where all this information is. And if you click on any of these, it's asking for my password. Log me out. If you click on any of these items, it's going to give you the documentation of what these items mean. And we've also included in here references back to the FASB codification, which supports that. So if you click on any of these items, you'll see you can see what they mean. Now, there's a couple of other things here. There's some axes. What these are is, if you think of this like an Excel spreadsheet, these little boxes with red dots on them are effectively like the column heading. You could think of these as rows. In the work in progress reports, process reports, you'll see a lot of these items that we've got as line items. They'll actually be columns, and the contracts will be rows. But you can flip it either way. In this contract, there's two here. We have one, which means you can break this contract report up into work in process report up into contracts that are complete or contracts that are incomplete. And then you can also create rows which represent individual contracts. So every one of these line items could be repeated multiple times. So what I suggest is you have a look at this. You can see what these items are. The other thing we've included in this taxonomy is a couple of other things. This is what the presentation view is. You can click here. You can see a calculation. This just shows you what is the calculation relationship between these items. So you can see costs in excess of billings as part of assets. Contracts incurred to date plus contract cost estimated cost to complete is equal to the contract cost estimated cost. So there's a whole bunch of relationships, and you can have a look through that, and we've defined those. So we've defined how these elements relate to each other when you look at them in a presentation, and how they relate to each other from a calculation perspective. So you can use those calculations to calculate totals or to check that totals are right, and Alex will talk about that in a minute. The other thing that's on the website is something called, which is if you wanted to try and implement this, which would be very useful, is the work in process preparer's guide, and I brought this up here. And what this document does is it just lays out what are the underlying assumptions in building the taxonomy, what the logical structure, and we kind of walk through, how do individual contracts relate to, the way that the taxonomy is structured, and we just try to document that so you get a pretty good understanding of it. So you'll see here in this document, it's talking about the taxonomy, what the flags mean, when they should be used, how they should be used. So this first section is everything about the taxonomy, how it's structured, why calculations are used and how they're used. We also talk about information about the document itself. If you want to include, what the period end date is, what period it relates to, all of that information is covered. Information about how you identify your what type of entity you are. And the last thing is the physical structure of the taxonomies, and this is very technical. You may not need to look at this, but if you're interested in how it integrates with the US GAAP taxonomy that the FASB publishes, this documents how that all works as well. And you may not necessarily need to know that, but it just gives you an idea of how it all works. And once you get more accustomed with Xbrl, that would be more useful. We talk about what tools you need to use. And then we have a section on here about how you create the instance and some of the things you just need to be aware of. If you're using a tool, then a lot of this will be handled for you. So that's an overview of the taxonomy and some of the material you need. You can go to the website, xbrl.us, pulling up surety information. You can look at the taxonomy. You can look at the preparer's guide. We've got some examples here as well of what an instance document would look like if you're interested in seeing that. And then also on the website we have some videos, and I'll hand it over to Alex, who can talk to you in a bit more detail about some of the pilots and software that you can use.
Thank you, Campbell, and hello everybody. Let me just switch over here to share my screen. My name is Alexander Falk. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Altova. We do Xbrl-based and XML data integration tools and software in that field. And the product that I want to give you a demo of today is called MapForce, and it is a data mapping tool that allows you to map data between different data formats very easily. And we're going to use this tool for talking about specifically the way a surety could import Xbrl data that is now in a WIP report into their in-house databases for further analysis and processing. We're going to define those transformations and mapping rules in a graphical user interface, and I will walk you through the individual steps of what you need to consider when you do that. At the very end, I will also talk briefly about an alternative process using a different tool that we have called Raptor XML Server. That's the case where you have a more complex, sorry about that, there seems to be a problem on my end. Okay, there we go. So the Raptor XML server can be used for whenever you have a more complex scenario where you need to process the Xbrl data in more different intricate ways, and we'll talk about that a little bit at the end. And obviously, I'm going to show you just the one-time mapping process here today, and then if you want to automate that, you can do that with our MapForce and FlowForce server products going forward. So the previous presenters have already talked about the work in progress report, how that usually looks like a spreadsheet, and we're going to tackle how to import that into your in-house database system at the surety. Clearly, the real-world database structure that you have in your in-house IT systems is going to be very different and very specific for each different insurance provider. For the purpose of this demonstration, we have just created a very simple sample database structure that has one table called contract that contains all these columns for each of the columns that appear in the spreadsheet in the typical work in progress report. But the same method that I'm going to show to you today can obviously be used for mapping to multiple different tables in the same way. So when you launch our MapForce product, what you see is a user interface that looks like this, where you have a library on the left that offers you a palette of functions that allow you to do different data transformations, conversions, calculations, which would be applicable specifically in case that you don't have the same data formats, or you have your data structure differently in your in-house database. And then in the center panel is where you drop data sources such as the Xbrl formatted WIP report or a database connection into this design surface, and then you develop a mapping simply by connecting the dots from one source to the other. And I'll walk you through some screenshots of that process right now. So if we add an Xbrl data source, we will obviously use one that's based on a taxonomy. So we select the WIP taxonomy. We tell Mapforce that we want to take the views from the presentation link base. What that means is that it will automatically give you the structure in a way that's similar to the taxonomy viewer that Campbell showed you a few minutes ago. And so when you drop that into your design surface, you get a really long table here that you can scroll all the way to the bottom. The reason it's such a long table is that we obviously support everything in Xbrl, so also the regular financial statements, profit and loss statements, etc. You can map those into your database as well with the same tool, but right now we're just going to talk about how to map the work in process report. And so you will scroll down all the way to the bottom until you find this 910,100 disclosure work in process. And when you open that, or we can simply hit the plus key in front or the star key and the numeric key pad, we will see all the child elements. And that's exactly what you saw when you looked at the taxonomy editor before. We have these dimensions in there, and then all the concepts underneath nicely structured and laid out. And that's going to be the source for our mapping. Similarly, we're going to add our simple target database by adding a connection to a database. We support all database servers you can think of. In my simple test sample here, I just use a SQLite database, but you'll probably connect to your Oracle or IBM DB2 or SQL Server database in your real IT infrastructure. And when you select the database table from that database, you then get this little database object that I see in the bottom right corner that represents that one table in my database, or in your case, in real life, probably 2 or 3 tables that you need to connect. So now that we have our Xbrl source for the WIP report loaded on the left side, and we have the database table loaded on the right side, we can start making connections from the source to the target, and we literally just draw lines from these little triangles here to the other side. What we're going to focus on in our mapping is we're going to start with this contract number axis, because for each contract that we find in the WIP report, we want to create one row in our database. So we connect that contract number axis to the contract table over here. We map the actual contract number, and then we also take, for example, a contract name and see what happens. So when we start drawing these lines, we can now go to the preview mode in Mapforce easily. And the first time we do that, we probably will get some kind of validation error message. And the reason is that sometimes the data types that you find in Xbrl are not compatible with the data types that you find inside of your database system. When that happens, you get an error message. In this case, we are seeing a node data type on the left side, and my target data type is an integer. A very nice trick that you can use in Mapforce is you simply convert one into a string, and then obviously anything can be converted back from a string into your target data type. Or you can match it exactly if you want to. So in this particular case, we're going to just, from the library pane, drag in a little conversion function, and voila, our mapping can proceed accordingly. So we'll make a few more connections. We we connect the revenue, estimated revenues. We will connect the lines for estimated costs and a few other things. And then the cool thing about Mapforce is there's an output pane at the bottom of the environment, and when you click on that, you immediately can see what the result of that mapping is. If we're mapping into a text file or into an XML file, we can immediately see the actual output. if we're mapping into a target database server, then what we will see in the output preview is a list of SQL commands that will be executed against the target database server. And so if we do that after we've connected the first 5, 6, or 7 elements, what we will see here is these rows, these insert statements. And the interesting thing is in my example file that I downloaded from the Xbrl.us website, I have 3 contracts in this particular WIP report. Yet, interestingly, I get 6 insert statements here. And that doesn't look quite right yet. And so I want to explain a little bit about what in the Xbrl system is causing that, because that might be something that some IT or database administrators might not be too familiar with. And what we need to talk about is that in Xbrl, we have this concept of contexts. And it's important to understand that some of these contexts are duration contexts, and other contexts are instant contexts. And what that means is an instant context really is something like a balance sheet value. It exists on a particular date or a particular point in time, whereas a duration context expresses information that is only valid if you consider a certain duration. For example, revenues over a particular quarter, or revenues over a particular period of time. And this is a fundamental concept of Xbrl, and the WIP process report cleanly structures this information according to these accounting principles. And so we have, for every contract in our WIP report, we have some concepts that are associated with a duration context and some concepts that are associated with an instant context. And the way we did the mapping initially was a very primitive mapping, and so every single context got mapped one by one, and that duplicated the number of rows in the in our target database. The nice thing about MapForce is we can easily work around that problem and correctly map both the duration context data as well as the instant context data into the same row in our target database, if that's our target database structure indeed, by detecting whether or not it's an instant or a duration context and then mapping it accordingly. And the way we do that in MapForce is that in our target database table, we use the right-click context menu command to add a duplicate input, which basically gives us the option to map data into the target database in 2 different and separate ways. And that's what we're going to do on the next slide here. So now that we've duplicated on the right side our table presentation, we can now add a filter, which is this little green box here up on top in the center. And the filter will do a test that has a Boolean input, and that test is simply an exists function, again dragged over from the function library. And we're going to test whether or not in this Xbrl period we find a start date value, which will tell us whether or not this is a duration context or an instant context or instant period. So we can now take this particular contract number axis here and route that to the filter with our Boolean input, whether or not it's an instant content or a duration content, and then route it either to the first block here on top or to the second block here on the bottom. And correlated with that different kind of contexts we are seeing, we also will now map fields differently. So for example, for duration periods, we will map the contract number and contract name. And for instant periods, we will map all the other fields here at the bottom, with the exception of the revenues, cost of revenues, and gross profit will also go down up here in the duration period, at the bottom of the duration period. The thing that links those two together in this particular case is our contract number. So the contract number is the primary key. We derived that here from the contract number access domain. And that will flow to both variants here. And so what we can now do is we can configure our database target so that it automatically will do an insert if it's a new row with a new contract number that it hasn't seen, and otherwise it will just do an update statement. And the way we do that is we click on the small button to the right of each contract table and specify the database actions in this little dialog here, where we can say, depending on what you get, we want to do an update if the contract number access domain is equal to what's already in the database. And if that is not found, then we want to do an insert of all the other elements. You would do it very similar if you had a more complex database structure where you have different tables that are linked by a certain primary key. You can create all the data in the subtables similarly, if need be, and there's some very good documentation training available about how to do that. But in this particular case, we are almost done. The last thing that we have to do is talk a little bit about what to do if you don't have certain fields in your target database. And as an example here, in my sample database, I just created one column called under overbillings, whereas in our Xbrl, we will always find that data split into two separate facts. One is going to be billings in excess of costs and earnings, and the other one is costs and earnings in excess of billings. Reason being that Xbrl best practices dictate that values in the Xbrl should ideally all be positive values. So rather than having one fact report either positive or negative values, it's split into two separate facts. We can, if that's indeed our target database structure, easily change that in our mapping process. So if we find a value in excess of costs and earnings, we can multiply that with a -1 and then map it into the same column in the target database if that's the way we want to then analyze the data in our backend system. It's just an example of the flexibility that you get in terms of the mapping process from Xbrl into your in-house database in this product. So now if you're putting this all together, this is what the complete mapping would look like. You will only have to do this process once, obviously, for your particular database structure that you have in-house in your IT systems. And then every single time a contractor sends you their Xbrl formatted work in process reports, you can simply run that either through the mapping tool or through a batch process and import it into your database and then do your analysis based on that data in your systems. Now let's look at what the output of such a mapping will look like if we run it over an example project here. If I switch to the output tab, I now get a SQL script that, when executed against the database, will create precisely those 3 rows for those 3 contracts in the Xbrl instance document. And the way it will do that is we will first generate essentially 3 insert statements that fill the data that was associated with the instant periods, and then we'll create 3 update statements to augment that data with the values that were derived from the other context periods. And then at the very bottom, I don't know if you can see that, it's probably a little bit too small, is those 3 rows viewed in a database viewer. So that's the information straight from the Xbrl instance document, taken from there and then loaded into the database system. So here's a quick summary. As I've shown you, it's fairly easy to develop such a mapping from Xbrl into a database with MapForce. You can apply this mapping to every single instance document that uses the same taxonomy. It doesn't matter which customer, which client, which contract it is, as long as they are sending it to you in Xbrl format based on the WIP taxonomy, you can import it once you've defined that mapping once. Those new instance documents can be imported either directly within MapForce, you can just run them through the mapping, or you can automate the process with our MapForce and Flowforce server products, where you can run that mapping based on either time triggers or event triggers. For example, the file arrives in a certain directory because the process you have established with your contractors is that they can upload it to you via FTP or via website interface. And then we can automatically pick it up from there and run it through the mapping. You can deploy those server products either locally in your IT infrastructure, or you can deploy it in the cloud and run them on Linux or Windows operating systems. So we support all of that. Now, as I mentioned in the very beginning, There is also a more advanced product available if you require more complexity in your systems, if you want to do more analysis, if you want to really dig into Xbrl in a much more fine-grained level, or if you have a huge performance need because you're receiving thousands of these documents every hour. There is a more high-performance version of our product available. It's called Raptor XML and Xbrl Server, and it's a processing engine that is really focused on high-speed processing of Xbrl documents and data. It's used by large regulators, for example, Bank of Indonesia and others, to process massive quantities of Xbrl documents. And it has a complete API, both available in Python and in .NET forms that allow you to completely tailor the process. So that's another way to do it, but that requires actual programming. So if you're a team of developers in-house that wants to tackle that, this is the tool to use that with. And if you want to help in getting started with that, we have a couple of samples available on GitHub that show you how you can work with Raptor XML and Xbrl Server, including how to process Xbrl filings from the SEC and other things. So that's sort of the second possible way of doing it, but for standardized, simple database imports, Mapforce certainly is the tool of choice because it makes it very easy to create that mapping from an Xbrl instance document in your in-house database. And with that, I will give control back to Michelle. Thank you so much.
Alexander, thanks very much. I'm going to share my screen again, and I'm going to move to the last section of our presentation here. And this is on how do you get involved. So I'm now going to turn it over to Robert Kuhn, who's going to walk us through that process.
Thank you, Michelle. Obviously, we've kind of taken, for those of you that have participated in our last webcast, as well as this one, we've gotten a little bit deeper into the weeds as far as the technical aspects of this, but the end result is that we want to make it easy for sureties and other credit providers to be able to import data from their contractor clients and just quickly turn it around and analyze it and determine what their stance is on those reports. We're focusing on the WIP because the work in progress was one of the missing pieces of Xbrl, but this taxonomy is available for all the financial data. So it's a pretty broad tool that I think is pretty easy and is a good fit to try and automate at least the initial analysis of financial statements and work in progress. So, we've got several ways to participate. The first, and it's ongoing, is to participate in the public review. As Campbell demonstrated, it's fairly easy to go in and look at the taxonomy that we've developed and provide input. If you think we're missing something, let us know that. If you think the definition needs to be tweaked, we need that information because this is the taxonomy is the foundation for moving forward and doing any automation. So we need to be sure to get this correct. So we want everybody to get in and look at it. The review is open now. It's been open. It's set to close on Monday, March 7th. So next Monday. So go on the site. The taxonomy's there. There's a preparer's guide. There's some demonstration tools that you can download and look at. For the software providers that work with sureties, they can download this and look at it and consider what they need to adapt their tools to work with the taxonomy. using the data standard should enable sureties to seamlessly bring in the XBRL formatted data into their financial systems without needing to rekey. I mean, I've been doing surety now for 30 plus years, and still remember when I was a young underwriter and low man on the totem pole, spending hours keying in the work in progresses, and then probably another hour or so trying to find all my keystroke mistakes. So this process should greatly simplify and speed that up. So there's software providers who are working with contractors. You know, you need to consider how your tools or your software can be adapted to help contractors create the XBRL formatted data. For the IT managers with the sureties, you know, we need you to look at the taxonomy and the preparer's guide to help us make sure that we're creating a taxonomy that meets your needs and the needs of all the other stakeholders. So review the concepts, read the preparer guides, you know, and as you do that, think about, are the labels and definitions appropriate? Are concepts missing? And also look at some of the comments that other reviewers have added to that taxonomy, so that, and if you have a different viewpoint or you agree or whatever, just, you know, take that in consideration as you make your own comments. Use the sample document to test bringing it into your system and making it work. How these solutions would work with your current financial processes, current analysis, the way your current systems that are in place for your underwriters. Do your current financial programs, are they able to adapt to meet these standards, or what tweaks would be needed to use? And then also consider joining the working group, which is several folks. We've got sureties represented, we've got CPAs represented. I help represent the agents in the industry, but we've also got some folks from the CFMA and contractors that are on the panel too, because we all want to make this as effective and accurate as we can. And your additional review and support would help that. We're also looking to identify a surety that would actually begin consuming the XBRL WIP reports to working, so that they would involve working with the software tools to map the taxonomy into your internal systems, like what we just showed, Alexander just showed. If you're interested in joining the working group, you know, give Michelle a call, send her an email, and help us make this as an effective tool as we can to streamline the underwriting process and make it better for our clients. And with that, I think, I don't know if Michelle, if we got any questions that we needed answered, or what do you want to close it out?
Thanks very much, Robert. Yeah, we've got a couple of questions, but just in terms of next steps, as both Greg and Robert mentioned, March 7th is the end of the public review, so that's next week. In late March, we'll be finalizing the first draft of the work in process taxonomy. And we'll also be at the NASBP conference, May 15th through 18th. So if you're there, you know, come talk to us, and we'll tell you a little bit more about the program. And you can see my contact information on the screen here. So if you're interested in getting involved, let us know. Just a couple of questions we've got, and I know some of them were a bit more technical, and so we just responded to those individually, or Campbell did. One of the questions was, is this something that the agent or the broker would use as well? And I believe that they may have been referring to the bonding agent. I don't know, Robert, is that something that you could address?
Ultimately, again, if you're using one of the surety automation programs like SurePath or Erlon or one of the similar programs, ultimately this is open to those providers too, to include the Xbrl functionality into their system. So yes, and frankly, as an agent, it's my hope that we can, because one of the more powerful tools we've got that this would give us is to be able to do some of the peer review or peer comparisons that we get from sureties, but to do it over, within our own database, with our own clients. Because that's one of the powerful things that I know my clients like to see is, how do they stand up to the competition or to their peers. So that is a hope that this functionality will become available to agents also.
Great, thank you. Okay, another question that came in is, can the same software be used to create financial statements in Xbrl as what would be used for the work in process in Xbrl? Can the same software be used? And Campbell, do you want to address that question?
Yeah, that'd be fine. Yeah, so if you're a lot of companies are already filing in Xbrl. That same software can be used. Obviously, one thing that is different is you're going to need the different taxonomy. Now, the work in progress taxonomy is based on, is very similar in terms of the structure to the US GAAP taxonomy. So you should be able to use those tools. The tools that we've tested it on, you can. So it depends obviously who on your software provider is, so you may want to check with them. But generally the idea of having a standard is that you only need one piece of software, so that it can be used across multiple different reporting requirements. And that's kind of the benefits of standardization. So yeah, you can use different Xbrl tools if you're using them for filing with other regulators today or for other purposes. You should be able to use it with this taxonomy.
Great, thank you. And the next question is, how much time and resources would be required by the contractor to convert their work in process data to Xbrl? Campbell, maybe you could address that question.
Well, it depends. There's a couple of things to consider, and I think there's a demo that Alex has given in the past where you basically can pull the taxonomy into the Excel. If you're preparing your work in progress in an Excel sheet, then it's just a matter of flagging the rows and the columns to do that. So the main cost would be the software costs associated with that. There is, if you're already producing Xbrl for other purposes, then obviously it's just the time of doing the mapping. In terms of this is a very simple report, and we created a number of example instance documents. We just took the work in progress and wrapped the Xbrl around it. And if you've already created the Xbrl report, if you've already created the work in progress report, that's the bulk of the work. And we found it took us about half an hour to put it, just to manually put it in Xbrl. But if you've got a tool, and once you've done the mapping once, it should be pretty instantaneous. And when we manually prepared the examples you see there on our website, that was just done. We actually just did that in an Excel spreadsheet and just wrote some macros to wrap some Excel around it. I wouldn't recommend anyone does that, and I just use a tool to do it. But one of the goals we have in terms of this is to try and get the cost down to the person preparing the work in progress to as close to zero as possible. Obviously, there's going to be some time to do the mapping, but once that's done, we wouldn't expect the time to be significant in any way.
Great, and we're also in conversations with some of the companies that provide financial management systems to basically create modules that would automatically generate an Xbrl instance document from their internal system. So that would essentially bring the cost down to zero, as you mentioned, Campbell. Okay, and I think we have time for one last question, and this is, are contractors going to produce financial statement documents as well as work in process and complete the contract schedules in Xbrl? I guess the question is, are contractors going to be asked to produce this? Because as we all know, this is not, there's no regulatory body here. We're just, no one is mandating this, but, are contractors going to be asked to produce financial statements as well as the work in process in Xbrl or in a structured data format? Maybe that's something for Robert or Greg.
This is Greg. I'll take that one. The answer is yes, but also with kind of with care, I guess. So we're going to I'd phrase it more as encouraging. This is going to be a long-term process. I mean, we are asking for somebody to volunteer to do this now on the surety side, as Michelle mentioned, and we do think that those of us that do implement the standard near term, we can start to use it actually with publicly traded companies now. So we'd encourage you to do that, but specifically with contractor and privately held firms. This is a multi-pronged approach. We want to reach out to the financial software providers, as Michelle and Robert said. We want to reach out to the CPAs and others, so that eventually it just becomes more the norm. It's not necessarily a surety requirement. It's something that just because of standard practice, it benefits everyone. Now, where part of that dialogue though would be to the contractor, look, the sooner you can get us this information, the more responsive we can be to your credit needs. And the banks would be having the same conversation. And then two, I mean, ideally we'd like everything, but it may be that it's up to each surety how they want to handle it and each broker. But you may say, well, at least start with the work in process schedule, because that's one that may affect the day-to-day bond requests that you get. That type of thing. So as mentioned, the whole point of this is to really reduce and get the cost down to be negligible for the contractor. Also answer the question, what's in it for the contractor? As Robert said, some of the benchmarking, we believe that the broker may want, or agent, we believe the contractor may have that ability too, if they invest in a financial package that's XBRL enabled, that they can get for their own purposes some benchmarking data, some data from external sources. So we're trying to look at all angles of that. So it's not a stick. It's a carrot the approach that we're taking.
Great, thanks very much.
I think that's a good way to put it. This is a long-term project for the surety industry. It's not and like most new technology, you're going to have your early adopters, and eventually it'll filter down so that it's hopefully at some point in the future it'll be, people won't even be asking about it. It'll just happen. But I think we need to build this foundation to be able to take the next steps.
I might add this, Greg, again, just real quick. Some sureties today give an Excel spreadsheet to contractors and ask them to fill out their work in process or maybe their financial statements. And in those cases, I mean, there is a possibility that we would enable the XBRL so that there's really no cost to the contractor. They're already doing it. It's just we're giving them a new format that then we can still extract that data into our system. So, there are many different solutions at play here, and it doesn't all fall on the contractor for that cost.
Great, thanks very much. I want to thank all of our speakers today. Alexander Falk from Altova, Campbell Pride from Xbrl US, Robert Kuhn from Scott Insurance, and Greg Davenport from Liberty Mutual. And again, I want to thank the NASBP for helping us, co-host this program. And also thanks to all of you who are able to attend. We'll be sending a link out to the replay to you tomorrow, and to everyone else who registered as well. So feel free to forward that on. And if any of you are interested in getting directly involved, please contact me directly, and we'll get you engaged, because there's a lot to go on. And also, please participate in the public review. Take a look at the taxonomy and the materials that are available up there. It'll help you really get a head start on how to use this with your tool if you happen to be a software developer, or how to use this with your internal systems if you're on the surety side. So thanks again, and we'll be continuing to communicate with you about other aspects of the program and other milestones that we reach. Thanks very much.